Title: The Reflection Beyond the Surface. Year: 125 million. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And the Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The smiling shadow was not welcome in most cities. Too sharp for the scholars, too kind for the killers, too strange for the ordinary. Wherever they went, people smiled thinly, then locked their doors. But the shadow was patient, and they always smiled back. In the kingdom of Kelbrin, a land ruled by the doctrine of pure lines, where ancestry was charted like star maps and deviation punished by exile, a strange thing happened. A mirror cracked. Not just any mirror, the mirror without mercy. It hung in the central court for 300 years, used to judge the unworthy, but now it reflected nothing. The smiling shadow was summoned not as a suspect, but a solution. Chapter 2. Court bristled at their presence. An outlier, one magistrate sneered. A distortion, hissed another. The shadow bowed. Perhaps, but even shadows reveal the shape of light. The mirror, silent and silver-veined, pulsed as the shadow approached. They placed one palm on its surface. It screamed. Images flared, memories of those they had condemned unjustly. Children exiled for laughter. Lovers separated for bloodline. Inventors shunned for stammered truths. The court gasped. The king demanded it be destroyed. The shadows shook their head. Destroying the mirror won't erase what it showed. But what else can we do? Look deeper. So they did, one by one. Chapter 3. Each member of court stepped forward, faced not others but themselves. Bias, fear, inherited cruelty. Some wept, some fled. One took off her robe and laid it at the shadow's feet. "Forgive us," she whispered. "I cannot," they replied. "But you can forgive yourselves if you begin." All changed that day. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to let indifference. Enough to welcome the unheard, and the mirror without mercy. It became a teaching tool, not for guilt, for growth. Because you can drown in shallow waters if you stand still too long. But when you move, you stir reflection, and shape a new shore. The smiling shadow left at night, but their smile remained, in the mirror and in the kingdom's heart. Title: The Moment That Broke the Clock. Year: 124,807,692.3. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The wild moth was banned from every temple, archive, and council chamber across the realm of Idren. Not because she lied, because she told truths too sharp to swallow. Her voice was set to stir the past and wake sleeping fears. But she never meant to harm. She just couldn't stay silent. The chronomender, by contrast, spoke rarely, choosing instead to wind moments back into place with clockwork precision. He could reset a heartbreak, stitch a second shut, or trap a trauma mid-scream. When time itself began cracking at the edges of Idren, they were summoned together. She arrived barefoot. He arrived late. They did not greet each other. They simply listened to the silence unraveling. Chapter 2. The rift opened at the spire, misremembering a place where time buckled and everything smelled like thunder and regret. The chronomender reached to stabilize it. The wild moth slapped his hand away. "Let it speak first," she hissed. "What if it screams?" Then scream back. Together, they stepped into the fracture. Inside, they found themselves versions twisted by fear. They showed a future where every error he didn't rewind destroyed nations. Hers screamed until she vanished. Unheard by all, he reached for his tools. She stepped forward with open arms. The past surged. Their fear surfaced, and still they stood, because facing your fears doesn't kill them. It teaches you their name. Chapter 3. The wild moth sang her scream. The chronomender broke his clock, and the fracture healed. Not erased, understood. When they emerged, neither was whole as before, but both were honest. He no longer rewound people's pain without asking. She no longer shouted alone. Together they built the archive of becoming a place where fear was welcomed like weather. Shifting, shading necessary. The plaque at the door read, "Control often owns you more than what you're trying to hold." And inside, you could find a girl who once screamed too loud, and a man who learned time could bend. And if you listened just right, you'd hear the moment they both let go and stepped fully in. Title: The Laugh That Lit the Dark. Year: 124,615,384.6. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Laughing Emperor didn't believe in heroes, not since the War of Hallowed Names, where valor was rewarded with silence and survivors were buried in shame. She had walked out of that fire alone, scorched but breathing, her laugh brittle and defiant. She roamed the fractured roads of the lowlands, where bandits posed as governors and the strong preyed openly on the desperate. But still she laughed. They said it echoed like flame over dry leaves. When the shadow whisper found her, It was in the act of shielding 3 children behind her body, facing down mercenaries twice her size with only a broken blade and a smirk. "Why fight a battle you can't win?" he asked. "Because they can." And then she charged. After 2, they survived. Barely. The whisperer followed her for days afterward. He watched as she mended wounds with ash poultices and coaxed laughter from the grieving. He didn't understand it. He was trained in subtle sabotage, silent dismantling, logic without emotion. But her strategy was hope, not naivety, fury channeled into protection. She said, "You are not healed because it stopped hurting. You are healed when it no longer controls you." He tested her, challenged her, even tried to scare her away. She stayed, until one night they found a village where children were being conscripted by a warlord promising food for servitude. The ember lit the field ablaze, not with fire, with stories. Chapter 3. She told tales of courage and open air, of rebels who defended not for glory, but for goodness. Her words became weapons. People rose. The warlord fell, not to blame, to shame. The whisperer, once silent, began to speak again. He told her secrets. She gave him laughter. Together they moved from town to town, not as saviors, but sparks, defenders, reminders. Because defending the weak isn't charity, it's civilization, and every society that forgets it burns from within. The laughing ember left behind no statues, only gardens where fear once grew, and the shadow whisperer. He became her echo, until laughter outnumbered silence, and weakness became strength. Title: The Ember That Refused to Burn Out. Year: 124,423,076.9. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac series, 2025. Chapter 1. The outcast flame lived on the city's edge, not because she was dangerous, but because she refused to dim. Once a celebrated tactician, she had been exiled after challenging a battle plan that would have won the war but lost too many lives. The council labeled her prideful, insubordinate. She called it love. They called it arrogance. She kept the armor, but not the rank, the shield. Maiden found her while repairing a shattered bridge, half out of duty, half out of curiosity. "You still believe you were right?" the maiden asked. "I don't need to be right," the flame replied. "Just not silent." And for the first time in years, someone didn't walk away. Chapter 2. The city needed defenders again. A breach in the northern cliffs meant an old threat had returned, scorched beasts born of molten regret and misplaced vengeance. The council convened. The outcast was not invited, but the shield. Maiden asked her help anyway. She refused, not out of resentment, out of fear. False pride had made her reckless before. It cost her place, friends, and nearly her soul. She feared that stepping back into leadership would be her ruin. The maiden didn't argue. She stayed. Each night they talked about shame, about second chances, about what it means to lead without applause. And finally the flame stood, not tall, but true. Chapter 3. In the battle, her plan saved the city, not with a sweeping charge, but with a quiet maneuver, turning enemy against enemy, flame against flame. He let others take credit. She didn't need it. The shield. Maiden kissed her cheek as the dawn rose. "You did it." "I didn't finish perfect," the flame whispered, tears burning trails down streaked cheeks. "No," said the maiden. "You finished as a prayer." They rebuilt the bridge together, and the council, in time, rewrote her name on the wall of protectors. But she never returned to the center. Her home stayed at the edge, trying not to exile, but to humility, to love, and to the fire that bows but never bakes, because pride will break you, but grace will remake you. Title: The Shattering of One. Year: 124,230,769.2. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac series, 2025. Chapter 1. The echo of desire was once a solo architect of wonders, towers that bent starlight, bridges that whispered to those who crossed. He sculpted from solitude and revered perfection. Cities begged for his hands, but never his heart. In the cliffside village of Vestrin, a rift toward the valley, an ancient fracture reawakened by greed and forgotten war. The villagers pleaded for his help. He agreed, on one condition: silence. No interference. No opinions. Only his mind. The mirror serpent slithered into his dreams that night. A creature made of shards and secrets. It hissed. To break chains, you may first need to break open. He awoke trembling, but unmoved. Chapter 2. Weeks passed. He drew the plan, built the frame, and the structure began to rise. Then came the villagers with alternate ideas, warnings from old songs, memories buried in dirt. He rejected them all, until the platform cracked during a minor tremor one he had dismissed as irrelevant. 2 were injured, and the villagers stopped watching, stopped asking, stopped caring. Alone again, he stared into the mirror serpent's reflection summoned through water and shame. It did not speak. It only mirrored his pride, He shattered the mirror, and heard a voice not his own say, "Try again, this time with us." Chapter 3. He returned with open hands, not to instruct, but to listen. Together they drafted. Children drew mauls and sand. Elders marked forgotten ends with chalk and tears. Builders shared calloused insight, and the echo of desire. He echoed them all. The final design was imperfect, but it danced with the land. It flexed with tremors. It sang when wind passed through, and when it was done, no one claimed authorship, only stewardship. The mirror serpent returned one final time, its coils softer now. "You broke open," it whispered, "and so you built." Because trust in the collective is not weakness. It is wisdom multiplied, and every chain you break this way frees not just others, but yourself. Title: The Ripples We Leave Behind. Year: 124,038,461.5. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac. Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Starbinder had once worked in shadows, crafting pacts between the powerful and the celestial, binding fate to favor, and stitching stars into vaults only the rich could access. But then she looked down at the cities crumbling under hunger, the fields gone to dust, the children tracing constellations into cracked stone and calling them bread. She tried to leave the guild of astral brokers. They erased her records, declared her dead. But she was not dead. She was watching, and when the mirror without mercy shattered, splitting open the sky with visions of consequence, she knew her ripples had begun. Chapter 2. Greed had gone unchecked for too long. In the capital of Iran, the elite hoarded not just wealth, but possibility. Futures could be bought, second chances auctioned. The mirror without mercy, once used to punish deviation, now revealed something deeper. The echoes of every selfish act. A man who raised food prices to protect his margins saw 1,000 mothers weep. A leader who cut power to the east sector to light his banquets saw every flickering death. They ran, but the ripples reached them, and at the heart of it all stood the Starbinder, not to punish, to hold them still, to make them see. Chapter 3. The mirror regrew 9 palace halls, but in city squares. It reflected not faces, but consequences. Every decision made by the powerful could now be seen its true cost weighed in tears. Not old. Some tried to shatter it again, but the people had learned, and they stood in front of the mirror this time. The Starbinder took no title, only the vow she had stitched into the mirror's new frame. Your ripples shaped the ocean. They reached shores you may never see. The ribbon changed, slowly, painfully, but truly, and across the sea, in a land that never knew her name, a child felt a bit less afraid to dream, because a ripple had reached her, and left a star. Title: The Quiet That Broke the World. Year: Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac. Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Iron Sentinel was forged for silence, not only in battle where she moved like wind between blades, but in life, where emotion was framed as error and vulnerability as vice. She served the governors of the Eastern Keep, guarding decisions she did not challenge. She said nothing, until the puzzle-hearted one came, a wandering healer, with eyes like autumn dust and questions that unspooled locked hearts. They arrived with no title and no weapons, just stories stitched into every touch. They met in the garden of still statues, where the sentinel went to pretend. "You keep pretending silence is peace," it whispered. She did not reply, but she returned the next day, and the next. Chapter 2. Whispers spread of executions ordered in the depths, of rebel children disappeared, of decrees signed behind closed doors. The sentinel watched, listened, did nothing. The puzzle-hearted one brought her a broken music box one evening, carved in the shape of a crying lion. "It plays only when you speak truth near it," she scoffed. They placed it on her chest plate, left. At night, the sentinel heard it begin to sing, soft, tentative, unrelenting. "What's most essential," the healer had once said, "is often the hardest to begin." And so she began, with a whisper, then a refusal, then a roar. Chapter 3. She disarmed the guards who came for her, but spared them, walked barefoot into the great hall, removed her helmet, and told the truth. Names, dates, deaths, silence shattered, not just hers, but the people's. The puzzle-hearted one stood behind her, not as lover or savior, but as a mirror. Together, they became the breach in the system that led light through. The governors fell, the keep turned sanctuary, and the sentinel, she became the voice, not of vengeance, of remembering, because silence, once noble, had become rot, and only love had taught her that complicit hearts can still be reclaimed and turned into songs. Title: The Death That Reveals. Year: 123,693,146.2. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Ice Whisperer could freeze motion with a glance. Her gift was not born of rage or fear, but silence. She wielded cold the way poets wield pauses, stopping bullets mid-flight, quieting arguments before words formed, halting disasters with nothing more than a breath. But it cost her. She hadn't spoken in years. In the subterranean city of Vorelin, where people raced against clockwork days and repressed the past like a virus, she worked as a hero for hire, efficient, precise, alone. Then the lark of liminal waters arrived, loud, strange, shimmering in a costume made of featherlight nano-weave. They said things like the future is molting and progress is a song sung backward. Everyone laughed, but she didn't. She remembered those phrases from a dream she wasn't supposed to survive. Chapter 2. The lark sought her out, fluttering between time zones and surveillance fields. Your silence sings, they said. She frowned. I remember you, they continued. You died once. To become this. She froze the air between them, but they kept speaking. I did too. Change is a superpower no one respects, because it requires loss. She faltered. Later that night, she opened the sealed memory vault hidden in her spine where her first name, her first laugh, and her first failure were stored. She wept. The next day, she refused her next assignment, and followed the lark into the weaving tides, a breach between past and future where versions of oneself met without judgment. There, she saw herself, before, and forgave her. Chapter 3. The city fell into crisis. A virus of memory flooded the infrastructure, forgotten fears, repressed traumas, deleted truths now walked the streets like ghosts. The whisper returned, but not to freeze, to melt. She let the ice go, spoke one word, Naf, and in that single utterance, buildings were shaked, bridges repaired, people stopped fleeing and started listening. The lark sort of humming the note she gave them. Change spread. Not easily, but honestly, because some truths, veiled in stars and bone, require the death of a former self to be seen. And the ice whisperer, she became a thaw. The lark stayed near. Progress had come, in feathers, in frost, and in the voice once buried beneath silence. Title: The Cartography of Rain. Here, 123,461,538.5. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. A mapmaker of lost lands didn't draw what existed. She drew what could be. Her maps bled into reality, each stroke reshaping geography with memory and myth. She once redrew a desert into a forest simply by believing the people there deserved shade. But her gift came with cost. She could not map where there was no mutual will. So when the highlands and the floodplains began to war over sky rights ownership of rain, fall to ancient treaties, she was summoned not to fix the land, but the people. The rain singer met her halfway. He was a man of storms and sorrow, his voice able to coax clouds into laughter or lightning. But he, too, had grown tired of singing for one side, of watching the sky mourn. Together, they made no promises, only sketches. Chapter 2. The mapmaker proposed a shared horizon. Each faction scoffed. The Highlanders claimed age, the Londoners labor. You asked us to respect what does not respect us, they told each other. The rain singer replied, then show each other how. They began a ceremony beneath a contested sky. He sang. She mapped not land, but emotion. She traced where anger rooted, where fear pooled. Her quill danced with unspoken truths. The clouds gathered, not in threat and attention. The people stood beneath the sky, unarmed, unshielded, and waited for each other. The first drop fell between enemies. They caught it, together, and wept. Chapter 3. From that day, rain became shared ritual, no longer owned, but honored. Children from both lands learned to chart storms together. Elders from both told stories in mirrored verses. Disputes were solved with sky dances in the ink. The mapmaker redrew the boundary as a braid. The rain singer etched his final melody into the rivers. And then they vanished. Some say into the clouds, some say into each other. But all who remember know this. What you embrace reshapes you in its likeness. And only through respect, not conquest, can society become more than survival. It can become song, and every drop a note of it. Title: The Voice Beyond Silence. Year: 123,269,230.8. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan. Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Soul Weaver was trained to be invisible, not in the way shadows hide, but in the way doubt wraps around a heartbeat and makes you question if you're even there. She worked with a guild of unheard agents, where espionage was done not by trickery or force, but by self-erasure. The first lesson was simple. Trust nothing, especially your own voice. She passed every trial, rose swiftly, but never felt whole. A whisper of herself lingered behind every mission, a thread left unspun in the fabric of who she was meant to be. That thread began to tug, where she was assigned to observe the Ice Whisperer, an agent turned rogue, a traitor to silence. Chapter 2. The Ice Whisperer no longer froze cities. She taught them how to feel again. In underground salons and encrypted broadcasts, she guided others through unfreezing memories. In the Guild's eyes, she was a threat to secrecy and order. To the Soul Weaver, she was terrifyingly free. She infiltrated the Whisperer's circle, watched, listened, until she was invited to speak. She opened her mouth and nothing came. The Whisperer simply smiled. Her voice was never meant to fit inside approval. Something cracked. The next night, the Soul Weaver dreamed of herself shouting from rooftops and weaving truth into banners that flew above cities. When she woke, her pulse raced not with fear, but longing. Chapter 3. Her orders arrived. Eliminate the Whisperer. She walked into the meeting with a poison filament wrapped around her ring finger. The Whisperer was waiting, eyes soft, not afraid. I know, she said. Then why are you here? Because you're still listening. The Soul Weaver hesitated, then cut her own ring, brocked it, and spoke. I was never invisible. I was erased. And with that admission, she burned the signal beacon. The Guild came for them both, but the people came first. Hundreds shielded the building, bearing scars stitched with the Soul Weaver's threadwork, symbols of memory, resistance, self-truth. The Guild fell that day, not to war, to presence. And the Soul Weaver became a name people dared to say, because growth doesn't come from silence. It comes when you dare to hear yourself and answer out loud. Title: The Storm That Built Us. Year: 123,076,923.1. Year: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The once God wandered the borders of forgotten cities, where silence curled like smoke, and buildings leaned in to listen to ghosts. He had once ruled a pantheon of precision where order was law, and variance was heresy. But the world changed, people changed, and in his refusal, his temple crumbled. Now, he wore rags instead of robes, and carried no name, only questions. In the shattered district of Marrow Hollow, a plague of time sickness had begun warping moments. People forgetting hours, buildings aging centuries and minutes. The builder of broken time lived there, half machine, half memory. She did not fear the plague. She welcomed it, because change meant a chance to rebuild. Differently, together, they met in the heart of collapse. Chapter 2. The builder studied entropy like a friend. Her workshop contained clocks made of feathers and calendars composed of grief. The once God scoffed at her chaos. You mix elements with no hierarchy, he said. And yet I live, she replied. Marrow Hollow teemed with outcasts, each a puzzle, missing different pieces. Painters who saw sound, engineers who smelled time, warriors who fought with riddles. None fit his idea of creation. Until a storm came, a maelstrom of unraveling time and screaming echoes, one that knew his old name. It tore roofs from homes, aged children into elders, then reversed them into infants. The builder didn't run. She opened her arms and sang in reverse. Chapter 3. The storm broke him, but not as punishment as invitation. The builder handed him a shard of broken hourglass and said, the same storm that breaks you can also annoy you if you let it cleanse, not just crush. He knelt, not in surrender, in thanks. Together they built a new kind of sanctuary, not one of symmetry, but of syncopation, where everyone brought difference as gift, not flaw, where diversity was not just tolerated, it was celebrated. The storm returned, but this time it paused, and rained lightly, less sin. The once guide became the never known, a guide, not a ruler, and the builder. She turned the plague into playground, because progress is not found in mirrors, it is forged in contrasts, and in that clash, beauty, and breath, and becoming. Title: The Sacrament of Wildness. Year: 122,884,615.4. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. They called her the one who fell from the sky twice. The first fall was literal, a crash from a malfunctioning Ark-ship. Above the floating cities of Rhinal, she survived, barely, and was raised among ground dwellers who saw her as omen and outsider. The second fall was metaphorical. It came when she returned to Rhinal and saw what had become of it. A place where beauty had been hoarded, privilege encoded into architecture, and creativity filtered through eligibility indexes. She spoke, but was dismissed, until she met the Tide Caller. He did not belong to any class. He belonged to water, to chaos, to laughter that made people uncomfortable. They called him wild, unruly, dangerous. She called him necessary, Chapter 2. Together, they snuck into a sky-tier symposium, not to protest, to perform. They rewired the speaker system with poems disguised as data packets. They replaced algorithmic welcome screens with childhood drawings from ground-born kids. They served food seasoned with stories. The audience revolted, then listened, then asked questions. Some tried to shut it down. Others took notes. The tide caller whispered, "Your wildness is a sacrament in a world starving for wonder." And she began to remember not just who she was, but who she had never been allowed to become. Chapter 3. She launched the following school, a place where entrance required no test, only truth. Teachers weren't assigned, they were discovered. Learning wasn't ranked, it was echoed. The Council of Sky resisted. But children defected, architects defected, even algorithms, retrained by artists, began rebelling against the constraints. It wasn't war, it was wonder, and it spread. Because equity was not enforced, it was invited. Because opportunity wasn't granted, it was created, one choice at a time. And because the one who fell from the sky twice never wanted power, she wanted possibility. The tide caller left on the third full moon, left a message in the tides. You remembered, and she had. Because wildness was never the threat, it was the cure. Title: The Song Beneath the Chain. Year: 122,692,307.7. Era: Cradle of Titans. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Wound. Bear walked the glass paths of the last city with ribbons over her scars, not to hide them, but to remind others they were real. He had once been part of the choral assembly, a collective where voices blended to form law, art, and identity. Individual tones were forbidden. Dissonance was punished. They called it harmony. She called it erasure. She had sung her own name once, and they had branded her for it. Now she wanted the outer zones where silence bred rumor and survival meant forgetting who you were yesterday, until she met the wildmoth, who didn't forget, who wouldn't stop speaking, and who couldn't stop bleeding from truths too sharp for the assembly's ears. Chapter 2. The wildmoth had been exiled years before for composing the Disharmonic Codex, a song cycle built on fractured truths and offbeat memories. Her voice cracked traditions like ice. They met under a shattered bell tower. "You still sing?" asked the wound. "There, I still scream," the wildmoth replied. "Singing's what they tried to make me forget." Together they began humming fragments into the stone. Each note broke walls. Each word made statues weep. People began to gather, not to worship, to remember. One night, the assembly sent drones to silence them. They didn't fight, they sang. The drones short-circuited at the first awe-key cry. And still they sang. Chapter 3. Revolution came not as fire, but as echo. The city bent to hear its own disowned voice. The assembly fractured. Some wept, some screamed, some finally spoke. The wound. Bear stood before them and removed her ribbons. "These were not my shame. They were yours." The wildmoth stood beside her, bleeding verse. They built a new hall, not for harmony, but for honesty, where every voice was sacred, even the cracked, especially the cracked, because chains called tradition are the hardest to see, and only truth can cut them. The wound. Bearer bore no more wounds. Only song, only self, and finally, peace.